This story delves into mature themes of violence, murder, and psychological horror. Reader discretion is advised. We've crafted this narrative to be as gripping and immersive as possible, exploring the chilling depths of a fictional serial killer's reign of terror and the unwavering dedication of those who hunt him. The world we're about to enter is one where shadows hold secrets and every corner hides a potential threat. If you appreciate deeply woven mysteries, compelling character arcs, and narratives that challenge the boundaries of suspense, please consider subscribing or leaving a like to support our content. Your engagement fuels our ability to bring more immersive stories like this to life. Now, let the journey into the heart of darkness begin. The crisp New England autumn of 2023 was supposed to be a time of vibrant foliage, pumpkin spice lattes, and the gentle prelude to the holiday season in Havenwood, Massachusetts. Nestled along a historic coastline, Havenwood was a town of old money, older traditions, and the kind of quiet charm that made tourists flock to its cobblestone streets and antique shops. It was a place where doors were often left unlocked, and the evening's biggest scandal might be a misplaced garden gnome. Until, that is, the night the map began to unfurl. Detective Isabella Rossi, known simply as Izzy to her colleagues at the Havenwood Police Department, had seen her share of tragedy. Her 10 years on the force had presented her with the mundane and the heartbreaking. Petty thefts, domestic disputes, the occasional overdose, and the gut-wrenching aftermath of a traffic accident. But nothing had prepared her for the meticulous horror that awaited her in the grand, drafty Victorian home of Eleanor Vance, a woman whose life had been as predictable as the tide. Eleanor, 84 years old, a retired librarian and a pillar of the community, was discovered by her home care nurse, Martha Gentry, just past 7 in the morning. Martha, a woman whose stoicism usually bordered on unflappable, had been reduced to a trembling mess, her face the color of bleached bone. The call came in as suspicious death, a euphemism Izzy despised. Most deaths were suspicious until proven otherwise. This one, however, screamed something far more sinister than a fall down the stairs. The Vance residence was a museum of Victorian elegance, preserved in amber. Dust motes danced in the morning sunbeams that pierced the heavy velvet drapes. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and old paper. Izzy and her partner, Detective Marcus Miller, a man whose cynicism was as thick as his mustache but whose heart was surprisingly soft, entered the drawing room where Eleanor lay. Eleanor Vance was positioned on the Persian rug, surrounded by an exquisite, almost artful disarray. Her frail body, dressed in a silk nightgown, was splayed, her arms extended as if reaching for something unseen. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared up at the ornate ceiling, reflecting the faded grandeur of the room. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no frantic scramble for escape. Her face was serene, almost peaceful, a chilling contrast to the violent manner of her death. She had been strangled. The ligature marks, precise and deep, were visible beneath her silver hair. "Jesus Christ," Miller muttered, his usual bravado deflating like a punctured balloon. He ran a hand over his bald head, his gaze sweeping the room, searching for the obvious signs of a break-in, a robbery, anything that made sense. There was nothing. The antique silver on the mantelpiece remained untouched. The expensive oil painting of Eleanor's late husband hung perfectly centered. Izzy, however, was drawn to something else. On Eleanor's chest, resting precisely over her sternum, was a small, perfectly smooth, obsidian black stone. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It looked like something found on a windswept beach, polished by eons of ocean currents, yet it felt impossibly warm to the touch. And next to it, carefully placed on the silk, was a single, intricately folded piece of parchment. She donned latex gloves, her movements precise. She picked up the parchment. It was aged, delicate, and when unfolded, revealed a hand-drawn symbol. It wasn't a letter, nor a number, nor anything she immediately recognized. It was a stylized, almost calligraphic design, resembling a fragmented compass rose, or perhaps a series of intersecting lines that evoked the partial outlines of a map coordinate, utterly alien and unsettling. The ink was a deep, rich sepia, as if drawn with an old-fashioned quill. "What in the hell is that?" Miller asked, leaning closer. "I have no idea," Izzy replied, her voice tight. Her gut, usually a reliable compass, was screaming. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was message. The crime scene was pristine, eerily so. Forensics, led by the perpetually harried Dr. Evelyn Reed, meticulously processed every inch of the room. No forced entry. No fingerprints other than Eleanor's and the nurse's. The killer had worn gloves, moved with an almost surgical precision. The only thing disturbed was Eleanor herself, and the chilling artifacts left behind. Days bled into a week. The town buzzed with whispered rumors. Fear, a foreign concept in Havenwood, began to seep into the collective consciousness. The police department worked tirelessly, but they had nothing. No witnesses, no CCTV footage, no leads. The symbol was uploaded to every database imaginable, cross-referenced with cults, ancient languages, even astrological charts. Nothing. The obsidian stone was analyzed. It was just a smooth, natural piece of volcanic rock, devoid of any discernible markings or residue. Then, a week and a half after Eleanor Vance's murder, the second body was found. This time, the victim was 32-year-old Tommy O'Connell, a charismatic, if somewhat reckless, local bartender known for his infectious laugh and his penchant for late-night poker games. His body was discovered in his small, modern apartment on the other side of town, a stark contrast to Eleanor Vance's historic mansion. Tommy was found slumped over his kitchen counter, a half-eaten bowl of cereal still beside him. Like Eleanor, he had been strangled. Like Eleanor, there was no sign of forced entry. Like Eleanor, his eyes were wide, fixed on something beyond the ceiling. And on his chest, perfectly positioned, was another obsidian stone, identical to the first. Next to it, another piece of parchment, unfolded to reveal the exact same cryptic symbol. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated repetition, sent a jolt of ice through Izzy's veins. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. Havenwood had a serial killer. 2 victims, completely different demographics. Izzy mused aloud in the cramped briefing room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The whiteboard behind her was covered in timelines, victim profiles, and frantic notes. Eleanor, an elderly, respected, reclusive woman. Tommy, a young, outgoing, working-class man. "What's the link, Miller?" Miller, nursing a lukewarm coffee, shook his head. They didn't know each other. No shared social circles, no common haunts, no financial connections. Vance lived off an inheritance. Tommy worked for tips. It's like he's picking them at random, or there's a connection we're missing. Agent Sterling Hayes of the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in. He was a man of quiet intensity, with eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. Sterling had a reputation for understanding the twisted logic of the most depraved minds. He moved with an almost unnerving calm, observing everything, speaking little. "The precision is key," Sterling stated, his voice a low rumble, as he examined the crime scene photos projected onto the screen. "No forced entry suggests he gained trust, or he's exceptionally skilled at bypassing locks. The lack of struggle in both cases points to surprise, or perhaps a method of incapacitation that leaves no marks. But it's the signature that truly speaks volumes." He pointed to the symbol. "This isn't random. It's deliberate. It's personal. And the stone is a symbolic anchor. He's not just killing them, he's marking them. He's claiming them. He's creating something." "Creating what?" Izzy pressed, her frustration mounting. Sterling's gaze met hers. "A map, Detective Rossi. He's drawing a map. Each victim is a coordinate, a landmark in his twisted vision." The FBI's involvement brought a fresh wave of resources, but also an overwhelming sense of urgency and media scrutiny. The Havenwood killer, the local papers screamed, quickly escalating to the midnight cartographer, as the cryptic symbol became public knowledge. National news outlets picked up the story, plastering images of Eleanor and Tommy across screens, sensationalizing the chilling absence of motive. Havenwood, once a quaint postcard, was now a town gripped by terror. Izzy felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. She saw the symbol in the shadows, heard Eleanor's silent scream in the rustle of leaves outside her window. She felt the fear radiating from the townspeople, the suspicious glances, the locked doors, the empty streets after dark. Her personal life, a carefully constructed facade of routine and solitude, began to fray. Her only companion, a rescue beagle named Gus, would whine softly at her feet, sensing her unease. Izzy would run her hand over his soft fur, wishing for a moment of peace, a moment where the chilling symbol wasn't etched into her mind. The team followed every lead, no matter how tenuous. They interviewed everyone Eleanor and Tommy had ever known, searched their digital lives, cross-referenced databases for similar symbols globally. Nothing. The cartographer was a phantom, leaving only death and his enigmatic mark. Then, a small detail, almost missed, surfaced during a re-examination of Eleanor Vance's neighborhood. A security camera from a dry cleaner, 2 blocks away, had captured a fleeting image just after midnight on the night Eleanor was murdered. A figure, tall and slender, in a dark hooded coat, walking swiftly, deliberately, almost gliding, down a side street. The face was obscured, but the gait was distinctive, unhurried, confident. The timestamp placed him in the vicinity hours before Martha Gentry found Eleanor. It was a ghost. A week later, just as the initial fear began to settle into a dull ache, the cartographer struck again. This time, the victim was a young woman, Sarah Jensen, a vibrant college student home for the semester, working part-time at a local bookstore. She was found in her small apartment above the bookstore, in the heart of downtown Havenwood, mere blocks from the police station. The discovery was made by the bookstore owner, worried when Sarah didn't show up for her morning shift. Sarah, like the others, had been strangled. Like the others, no forced entry. Like the others, an obsidian stone and the chilling symbol lay on her chest. But this time something was different. The symbol, while recognizably the cartographer's, had an additional subtle flourish. A single, delicate line extending from one of its points, like an arrow pointing west on an antique map. It was a minute alteration, almost imperceptible, but to Izzy, who had spent sleepless nights staring at its image, it was a profound shift. "He's evolving," Sterling noted, his voice devoid of emotion, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of dread. "He's not just marking them, he's guiding us. Or perhaps, he's guiding himself along the map he's creating." The new detail was a spark in the overwhelming darkness. It was a clue, however abstract. Izzy felt a surge of adrenaline, mixed with a cold, terrifying certainty. The cartographer wasn't just killing. He was telling a story, one victim at a time, charting a path of dread across Havenwood. And the latest addition to his chilling map suggested he was far from finished. The town's fear was no longer a dull ache. It was a screaming siren, echoing in every empty street, every locked door, every whispered prayer for safety. Havenwood was living on borrowed time, and Izzy knew, with a chilling certainty, that the cartographer's next stroke on his haunted map was already being planned. The subtle alteration to the cartographer's symbol, the delicate, almost imperceptible line extending westward, plunged Havenwood into a deeper abyss of terror. It was no longer just the act of murder that horrified, but the chilling implication that the killer was actively communicating, refining his grotesque art. The media, hungry for every new detail, latched onto the evolving signature, creating a nationwide spectacle of fear and morbid fascination. The midnight cartographer, a phrase once whispered in hushed tones, was now screamed from every news channel, every podcast, every online forum dedicated to true crime. Havenwood became synonymous with dread, its picturesque charm overshadowed by a pervasive sense of vulnerability. Detective Izzy Rossi, now working on an almost non-existent sleep schedule, felt the weight of the nation's eyes on her department. The FBI presence had intensified, with Agent Sterling Hayes effectively leading the task force, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the barely contained panic of the local officers. Sterling possessed an almost unsettling ability to dissect the killer's psychological landscape, offering insights that were both brilliant and deeply disturbing. "This isn't just about a geographic map," Sterling explained during one of their endless briefings, his voice low, his gaze sweeping across the tired faces of the task force. "He's mapping something else. A social landscape, perhaps. A moral one. Each victim represents a point on his personal map, a landmark of significance within his distorted worldview." The task force painstakingly re-examined every detail of the 3 victims: Eleanor Vance, the elderly reclusive matriarch; Tommy O'Connell, the young, outgoing bartender; and Sarah Jensen, the bright, ambitious college student. Their lives, though disparate, were meticulously dissected for any common thread. Were they all lonely? Were they all too connected? Too isolated? Did they share a secret past? A specific habit? The answer remained elusive. Izzy, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the westward line in the latest symbol was more than just a psychological marker. Felt like a literal direction. She spent hours poring over Old Town maps, cross-referencing them with victim locations, historical landmarks, even obscure geological features. Her gut instinct, honed by years on the force, told her the cartographer's art wasn't purely abstract. There was a method to his madness, a literal, physical journey he was embarking upon. Her relentless pursuit began to take a toll. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. Gus, her beagle, would often nudge her hand, sensing her frayed nerves, a silent plea for a moment of normalcy. She found solace only in the cold, logical pursuit of the killer, shutting out the rest of the world. Miller, ever the pragmatic one, worried about her. "You gotta sleep, Izzy," he'd grumble, bringing her another lukewarm coffee. "You burn out, we lose our best shot." 2 weeks after Sarah Jensen's murder, the westward line proved to be a terrifyingly accurate compass. The 4th victim was found in the small, adjacent town of North Havenwood, a quaint, rural community just a few miles west of Havenwood proper. The geographical shift was undeniable. The victim was 28-year-old Mark Tremblay, a quiet, unassuming park ranger, known for his love of the outdoors and his meticulous maintenance of the local nature trails. His body was discovered by a lone hiker on a secluded path deep within the North Havenwood State Park. Mark had been meticulously arranged, his body resting on a bed of freshly fallen leaves, his eyes gazing up at the autumnal canopy. He too had been strangled, and on his chest, the obsidian stone and the chilling parchment, now bearing a symbol with 2 westward lines extending from its core. The audacity of the killer, moving across town lines, escalating his signature, sent shockwaves through the entire region. The fear was no longer confined to Havenwood. It had metastasized, spreading its icy tendrils to neighboring communities. Roadblocks were set up, patrols increased, and a desperate plea for public vigilance was issued. But how do you catch a ghost who leaves no trace but death and cryptic symbols? "He's not just moving west, he's charting a journey," Sterling observed, his voice hushed, as they reviewed the new crime scene. The park, usually a place of serene beauty, now felt profoundly menacing. Each stroke, each line added to the symbol, is a step on his path. He's building something, physically and ideologically. Izzy, staring at the enlarged image of the symbol, felt a sudden, electric jolt. What if it's not just a direction, agent? What if it's a distance? What if each line represents a specific measure, a set number of miles? Sterling's eyes narrowed, a flicker of interest igniting in their depths. "Go on, detective." Eleanor was in central Havenwood. Tommy, a few miles north. Sarah back downtown. Mark, several miles west. If we measure the distance and direction between the precise locations of the victims, and then correlate that with the increasing number of westward lines, perhaps there's a mathematical progression. The idea was audacious, but in the absence of any other tangible leads, it was a lifeline. The task force, under Izzy's frantic direction, began mapping out the victim locations with painstaking precision, using GPS coordinates and high-resolution satellite imagery. They measured the distances between Eleanor and Tommy, Tommy and Sarah, Sarah and Mark. The numbers were inconsistent in terms of exact mileage, but the directional progression was undeniable. Each subsequent victim was found further west, and the symbol's added lines reflected that westward movement. He's using a warped form of triangulation, Sterling concluded, his voice barely above a whisper. He's not just moving west, he's building towards a specific point. A central locus. He's mapping a target. The new theory brought a chilling realization. The cartographer wasn't just killing randomly. He was using his victims to point to something. Or someone. The stakes escalated from simply catching a killer to deciphering a deadly puzzle before the final, devastating piece was put into place. The pressure on Izzy became almost unbearable. She started seeing patterns everywhere. In the cracks of the pavement, the arrangement of stars, the way people walked. She'd wake up in a cold sweat. The symbol burned into her retina. The faces of Eleanor, Tommy, Sarah, and Mark haunting her. She began to suspect that the cartographer wasn't just observing Havenwood. He was inside it, an unseen hand manipulating its very fabric, a shadow among the town's unsuspecting inhabitants. A major break came not from forensics, but from a persistent, often overlooked source. A local amateur historian, Evelyn Higgins, a frail but sharp woman in her late 70s who had dedicated her life to preserving Havenwood's forgotten past. Evelyn, having followed the news intently, recognized something in the cartographer's symbol. She called Izzy directly, her voice trembling but firm. "Detective Rossi, that symbol. I've seen it before. Not exactly, but something like it. It's from an old, forgotten society. The Ethelred Guild. They were cartographers, astrologers, and land surveyors in the early 18th century, instrumental in the original mapping of this region. They had a hidden library, filled with their esoteric charts and symbols. Evelyn, with painstaking detail, explained that the guild had been shrouded in secrecy, eventually disbanding after a series of controversial land disputes and rumored occult practices. Their headquarters, a now crumbling manor house on the outskirts of Havenwood, had long been abandoned, its history fading into local folklore. Izzy, Miller, and Sterling immediately converged on Evelyn's small, cluttered home. She showed them faded sketches from an old guild journal she had painstakingly acquired decades ago. The similarities were undeniable. The fragmented compass rose, the stylized lines, they were adaptations of the guild's obscure surveying markers, used to denote specific, often hidden, points of interest or disputed territories. "The cartographer isn't just drawing a map," Izzy whispered, a cold wave washing over her. "He's completing one, an old one, a map laid down centuries ago." The revelation was profound. The killer wasn't creating a new map from scratch. He was following an ancient, forgotten blueprint, adapting its symbols for his own horrific purpose. This gave him not just a direction but a history. The team immediately turned their attention to the abandoned Ethelred Guild Manor. It was a decaying edifice, overgrown with ivy, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world. It was a place long rumored to be haunted, a fitting lair for the unseen monster. The manor was extensively searched, but it was empty, a desolate shell. However, in a hidden compartment beneath a loose floorboard in what was once the guild's main study, they found something chilling. A small, leather-bound journal. It was old, brittle, and filled with meticulous handwriting. It wasn't the cartographer's journal. It was a historical account, penned by a disgruntled, expelled member of the Ethelred Guild from the 18th century. The journal detailed the guild's secret practices, their mapping techniques, and their belief system. They saw themselves as the true guardians of the land, chosen to correct its imperfections, its deviations from a pure, divine order. The disgruntled member spoke of a master map, a final, ultimate survey that would pinpoint the heart of corruption within Havenwood itself, a place where all the town's perceived flaws converged. The journal writer, in his bitterness, had detailed how this master map was to be created, by using specific human landmarks to chart the true path to this corrupt heart. Izzy felt a shiver of understanding, a horrifying clarity. The victims weren't just random. They were chosen. They represented the human landmarks for the cartographer's chilling project, each one a different manifestation of the societal corruption the ancient guild, and now his modern disciple, sought to expose and correct. "He's not just an admirer of the guild," Sterling stated, his face grim. "He's a true believer. He's following their twisted doctrine, using the lives of these innocent people to complete their master map." The journal also hinted at a final, ceremonial key that would unlock the location of this heart of corruption, a specific final victim or a final symbolic act. The two westward lines on Mark Tremblay's symbol, the geographical progression, the historical context, it all began to coalesce into a terrifying, coherent plan. The cartographer wasn't merely killing. He was building towards a grand, horrific crescendo. The fear in Havenwood wasn't just about an unknown killer anymore. It was about an unseen, ancient evil reawakened, a conspiracy spanning centuries. The town was a pawn in a game far older than anyone could have imagined. And Izzy knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the cartographer was about to make his final, most devastating stroke on his terror-filled map, a stroke that would reveal the heart of corruption and demand a final, bloody sacrifice. The race against time had just become a race against history itself. The revelation of the Ethelred Guild's ancient doctrines and the concept of the master map galvanized the task force, transforming their hunt from a desperate search for a random killer into a historical decryption project. The cartographer was not just a murderer. He was an ideologue, a disciple completing a centuries-old, twisted mission. Havenwood was no longer just a crime scene. It was the canvas for a chilling masterpiece of death. Izzy, fueled by adrenaline and the grim weight of the journal's prophecies, was relentless. The westward lines in the symbols were now understood not just as direction, but as a deliberate, progressive journey towards a final, climactic point. The team, guided by Evelyn Higgins's deep knowledge of Havenwood's history and Sterling's psychological insights, meticulously overlaid old guild maps with modern satellite imagery, searching for a convergence point, a historical landmark that aligned with the killer's calculated trajectory. The journal hinted at a key that would unlock the final location, a specific ritual or victim that would complete the master map. This terrified Izzy, knowing that the cartographer's endgame was rapidly approaching. The sense of urgency was palpable, a suffocating blanket draped over the entire region. The entire nation watched, breath held, as the story of the Midnight Cartographer morphed from a local horror into a macabre historical saga. Weeks turned into a month. The autumn leaves had fallen, leaving Havenwood bare and skeletal, mirroring the grim mood of its inhabitants. Then, the silence was shattered by the fifth murder, confirming Izzy's darkest fears. The victim was 70-year-old Arthur Finch, a respected, though somewhat controversial, local historian known for his scathing critiques of modern society and his fervent belief in the good old days. His body was discovered in his secluded cabin deep within the forests surrounding North Havenwood, further west than any previous victim. Arthur had been strangled, meticulously positioned, his eyes gazing up at a framed antique map on his ceiling. On his chest, the obsidian stone and the parchment. This time, the symbol bore 3 westward lines and a new, distinct addition, a small, almost imperceptible circle at the very end of the 3rd line. "The key," Izzy whispered, tracing the new symbol on the projected image. "He's reached his destination. The circle. It's the final landmark. The heart of corruption." Sterling's face was grim. "He's made his statement, detective." Arthur Finch, a man obsessed with history and societal decline, was chosen to be the final human landmark. He represents the culmination of the cartographer's ideological journey. The geographical plotting, combined with the new circle on the symbol, finally yielded a chilling convergence point: the old Havenwood Public Library. Not the new, modern facility, but the original building, a grand but neglected structure from the late 19th century, standing in the heart of Havenwood, surrounded by a forgotten, overgrown graveyard. It was a place steeped in history, a repository of knowledge, and ironically, a symbol of both enlightenment and neglect. The Ethelred Guild's archives, Evelyn Higgins confirmed, had briefly been stored there before their dispersal decades ago. The library, Miller said, his voice heavy. It's been closed for renovations for months. No one goes there. Perfect, Izzy replied, a cold certainty settling in her gut. A place of forgotten knowledge, a symbol of what he perceives as a decaying society's past, present, and future. It's his temple. The task force mobilized. Armed police units descended on the old library, silently surrounding the crumbling brick edifice. The air was thick with tension, the anticipation of confrontation hanging heavy. Izzy, Miller, and Sterling led the charge, their weapons drawn, their senses on high alert. Inside, the library was a mausoleum of dust and silence. Moonlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the decaying grandeur of the main reading room. Shelves upon shelves of forgotten books loomed like silent sentinels. The air was cold, thick with the scent of aged paper and decay. Clear! Came the whispered reports from teams methodically sweeping the ground floor. They moved deeper, into the labyrinthine stacks, the echoing creaks of the old building amplified in the oppressive silence. Then, from the basement, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound. They descended the creaking wooden stairs, flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. The scratching grew louder, joined by a soft, almost melodic humming. They found him in the old archives room, a cavernous space filled with filing cabinets and dusty historical records. He was a man in his late 30s, slender, meticulously dressed in dark, unassuming clothing. His back was to them, illuminated by a single, powerful lantern. He was hunched over a large, wooden drafting table, covered with ancient maps and parchments. His hands, gloved, moved with a delicate, artistic precision, using an old-fashioned quill to draw on a vast, unfurled piece of parchment the master map. He was humming a low, almost liturgical tune. "Drop your weapon," Sterling commanded, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The man slowly turned. His face was unremarkable, almost forgettable. Pale, thin lips, intense, dark eyes that held a chilling, distant focus. He held no weapon, only the quill. Yet, there was an undeniable aura of dangerous calm about him. He was not surprised, not scared. He had been waiting. "Ah, the Seekers," he said, his voice soft, almost cultured, devoid of any discernible emotion. "You've finally arrived. Just in time for the unveiling." Izzy recognized him. His name was Elias Thorne. He was a quiet, unassuming cartographer who worked for the city's planning department, often consulting on historical property lines. He had a reputation for being meticulous, a recluse, but harmless. He had even been interviewed early in the investigation, a peripheral acquaintance of Eleanor Vance through the Historical Society. He was the ghost, the shadow, hiding in plain sight. "Elias Thorne," Izzy said, her voice shaking slightly, a mix of triumph and horror. "It was you." "Of course," Thorne replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Who else understood the true language of the land? The silent whispers of history? Havenwood is dying, detective. Choked by its own complacency, its superficiality, its forgotten past. I am merely revealing its true face, its diseased heart, just as the Ethelred Guild intended. He gestured to the vast map on the table. It was a detailed, hand-drawn map of Havenwood, overlaid with the cartographer's symbols. Each victim's location was marked, connected by the growing westward lines, all converging on a single meticulously drawn circle, the old library itself. And within the circle, a small yet prominent X. Eleanor Vance, the relic of a dying past, Thorne narrated, his voice like a gentle guide. Tommy O'Connell, the embodiment of transient, unrooted pleasure. Sarah Jensen, the ambitious yet ultimately hollow promise of the future. Mark Tremblay, the unseeing guardian of a desecrated nature. Arthur Finch, the voice of forgotten truth, silenced by a world that no longer listens. "You killed them," Miller growled, stepping forward. "You murdered innocent people for this." This delusion. Thorn merely tilted his head. Innocent? They were landmarks, detective. Necessary coordinates in a grand survey. Each one, a stroke on the master map, leading to the heart of what truly ails this town. He tapped the X on the map. This very spot, the forgotten core, the ultimate corruption. What is the X? Sterling asked, his voice calm, trying to draw Thorn out. Thorn's eyes gleamed with a fanatical light. It is the true legacy of Havenwood, Agent. A secret buried for centuries. The original Ethelred Guild discovered it. A blight, a cancer. It must be exposed. And for that, the final offering must be made. He turned back to the table, his hand reaching for something beneath a cloth. Izzy saw it, a glint of metal, a ceremonial dagger, its blade wickedly sharp, its hilt adorned with the cartographer's symbol. He's going to complete the ritual, Izzy yelled, lunging forward. Thorn moved with surprising speed. He snatched the dagger, his eyes still fixed on the map, a look of profound, almost religious ecstasy on his face. He intended to plunge the dagger into the X on the map, a symbolic and possibly actual act of desecration. A struggle ensued. Miller tackled Thorn, knocking the dagger from his hand. It clattered across the stone floor. Thorn, surprisingly strong despite his slender frame, fought with a desperate, unhinged ferocity, fueled by his delusion. Izzy joined the fray, trying to restrain him, but he was driven by something beyond mere physical strength. He kept trying to reach for the dagger, his eyes still locked on the X. Finally, with a combined effort from Izzy, Miller, and Sterling, Thorn was subdued, handcuffed, and dragged away, still muttering about the unveiling and the corrupted heart. The old library, once a place of silent history, was now a crime scene. The master map lay on the drafting table, unfinished, the X still unmarked by the final bloody stroke. The reign of the Midnight Cartographer was over. In the aftermath, Havenwood slowly began to heal. Elias Thorn was incarcerated, declared legally insane, but his motives remained a chilling testament to the darkness that can fester beneath the surface of seemingly idyllic communities. The corruption he spoke of was never explicitly found, but the fear he instilled, the innocent lives he took, left an indelible mark. Izzy Rossi, though physically exhausted, felt a profound sense of relief, tempered by the lingering shadows of what she had witnessed. She had stared into the abyss of a warped mind, had walked the chilling path of his master map. She had saved Havenwood from its final ceremonial desecration. But she knew that some maps, once drawn, can never truly be erased. The fear of the Midnight Cartographer, the memory of his precise, chilling strokes, would forever be etched into the heart of Havenwood, a permanent landmark on the map of its collective memory. The quest for justice had ended, but the silent, haunting echoes of a killer's twisted vision would forever remind them that sometimes, the most profound darkness resides not in the unknown, but in the meticulous, artistic precision of a mind convinced it is drawing a truer path.